95% of people believe they're self-aware. Research puts the real number between 10 and 15%. But here's the thing. That's not even the most interesting part. Because for a lot of people, more self-awareness is actually making things worse, not better.
Yeah, think about the last time you said, I know exactly what I'm doing and I still can't stop. That feeling, that specific kind of stuck is not a sign that you need more awareness. It's a sign that awareness alone was never going to be enough. And nobody tells you that because we've been sold this idea that if you just understand yourself more, if you understand yourself well enough, change will follow. But the science says something very different.
Today we're breaking down why self-awareness without a next step is just a faster pipeline to rumination and anxiety, what the research actually shows about how change happens, and why we named our app Notice, Understand, Evolve. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
So let's start with something that challenges the whole premise of what we've been taught. Most of us are raised on the idea that the more you understand yourself, the better off you are. And on the surface, that seems obvious. But a researcher named Tasha Eurich spent years studying this. She's an organizational psychologist, and she wrote a book called Insight. And what she found was striking. While 95% of people believe they are self-aware, only about 10 to 15% actually are by any measurable standard. But the part that really matters is not just that people overestimate their self-awareness. It's that introspection in itself, that actual act of looking inward, often makes things worse. And she calls this the introspection illusion. The more you dig without a framework, the more distorted your read of your own feelings become. You're not getting clearer. You're getting more convinced of a story that may not be accurate.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And then Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan, he has a name for what happens next. He's spent his career studying the inner voice, and he wrote a book on it called Chatter, which we've talked about in previous episodes. His argument is that the voice in your head that's supposed to help you figure things out can actually turn against you. So he distinguishes between productive self-reflection, where you're actually working through something and landing somewhere useful, and what he calls chatter. So chatter is repetitive, self-focused thought that doesn't go anywhere. It generates anxiety instead of insight. The problem is that most people can't tell the difference from the inside. It feels, when you're thinking through something, it might feel like you're processing, but really you're looping. And that distinction matters because if your strategy is just to think about something more or to process it, you might be doing the opposite of what actually helps.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's like treading water versus swimming. Both of those burn energy. Both can leave you exhausted. You know, you're burning energy there. But one gets you to the shore, swimming, and one just keeps you from drowning in place. You're just treading water. So most people can't feel the difference from the inside, which is the whole point. They think exhaustion and constant introspection means they're working through the problem.
I love that analogy. And I think that's a really good analogy because both the actions of both might even appear to be the same, but in one you're getting somewhere, and in the other one you're literally just staying still.
So if more awareness isn't the answer, then what is? And this is where the research gets really useful. A psychologist named James Pennebaker, a former podcast guest on our podcast here, he at UT Austin ran some of the most replicated studies in behavioral health.
His work was so interesting. Sorry.
So interesting. No, it was fascinating. So in this research, what he had people do is write about difficult experiences in their lives. And he tracked what actually produced improvement. And what he found was this: the people who wrote about their emotions and made meaning from them, who connected the experience to something larger about who they are or what they believe, those people improved measurably. even their health improved, their mood improved, their performance improved. However, the people who just vented, who expressed the emotion without the processing step, did not. The difference wasn't whether they felt the thing, it was whether they understood what the thing meant. The bridge between noticing and changing is understanding, not more awareness. It's understanding. So venting is kind of like lifting the lid off of a boiling pot. It provides instant relief, steam escapes, and then when you set the lid back, that pressure builds right up again because the burner is still on, the heat is still on. Meaning making is reaching down and turning off the heat.
That's a good analogy. And I think that's interesting because when we didn't really get into that detail with Dr. Pennebaker in the podcast when we talked about the writing, but really interesting that when you can connect it to meaning, that actually ties a couple episodes together when we talked to him, but we also had one where we talked about meaning in life. And when you can connect your struggles to meaning, then you can endure anything. So it's interesting that his research saw the same thing. When people writing connected what they were going through to meaning, they improved.
Right.
So let's name what we're actually talking about. The awareness gap is the distance between what's happening inside you and knowing what to do about it. So most people are stuck in that gap in between without even realizing it. They think the problem is that they haven't figured themselves out yet. And they're actually pretty figured out. The problem is that nothing on the other side of the awareness connects to action. So what this is not is a character flaw. The research shows this gap exists for almost everyone because nobody taught us what comes after noticing. We're handed one tool, awareness, and told that that's the whole job. Just if we understand why, then we've sort of figured it out. We've talked a lot about Johann Hari, who wrote the book Lost Connections. In other episodes, he spent years studying addiction, and he came away with a realization that applies far beyond addiction. Most people already know the behavior is hurting them. So in the case of addiction, that's not the missing piece. You think of anyone you know or even yourself who struggles with an addiction. Alcoholics, drug addicts, whatever the addiction is, they know it's hurting them. They're aware. They might even be very aware of what their triggers are and other things. The missing piece is understanding what the behavior is doing for them. What need is it meeting? Either masking a pain or filling some other void. What pain is helping them avoid, or whatever it is. Once they understand the function of the behavior, then they can stop fighting the symptom and start addressing the root cause.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's a good example. And a good analogy to kind of explain this concept is picture the GPS on your phone. The first thing it does is find you, that blue dot. That's you, right? And the dot is genuinely useful. You can't get anywhere until you know where you're starting from. But notice what the dot does not do. The dot doesn't move you. Knowing where you are and arriving somewhere are two completely different things. When a GPS knows your location but has no destination, it just sits there, recalculating your position, refreshing again and again. Same dot, same spot. That's rumination. That's the loop. You're not stuck because you don't know where you are. You're stuck because knowing where you are was never going to drive the car.
I like that idea that about rumination is it's like refreshing your location. And so when people think that they're, by rehashing something, that they're getting somewhere, they just keep saying where am I now? Where am I now? Where am I now? And so, yeah, it's just, where you are, but that doesn't take you anywhere.
Right. And the route, from getting where you are to the destination, the route on the GPS is the part nobody hands you. The route is understanding. It's a line that connects where you are to where you're trying to go. And then you have to actually drive it. That's where something changes, right? So it's the dot, your location, the route, and then driving to the destination. So the awareness gap is just this. You've got the dot. You were never given the route.
Yeah. So that's what the science says, but let's talk about what this looks like in real life, because I think most people listening are really going to recognize themselves pretty fast. So let's look at some different areas of life. So let's just take work, for example, your work, your performance, maybe a real world scenario. You're procrastinating. You know why. You still can't start. So what's actually happening, awareness of the problem is looping into anxiety and reinforcing avoidance. You're not getting past that. The shift is understanding what the avoidance is protecting you from. And that opens the door to awareness. And kind of we talked about in our last episode or a recent episode about perfectionism. Maybe the reason you're procrastinating is a fear of delivering something imperfect, or maybe it's whatever it is. Just being aware that you're procrastinating isn't going to solve it. It's understanding what you're really avoiding.
Yeah, no, exactly. And let's look at, another area of life is relationships. Maybe, you shut down in conflict, let's say with a loved one. There's conflict. And when conflict arises, your tendency is to just shut down, like go silent mode. Silent treatment, exactly. And this pattern happens. You've known it for years. It still happens every time. So what's actually happening here is the pattern is named, but not understood at the level that allows a different response. And the shift here is asking what, not why. So what is this protecting me from, instead of why do I keep doing this? Changes the question. And it's interesting, in order to understand correctly in your brain to process these emotions and patterns, you have to make judgment objectively, not subjectively, meaning you have to have non-judgment when you're asking what, because most people just ask why, right? Like, why am I shutting down? Well, it's just because I'm not a good partner and maybe I'm toxic in relationships. Like, that's just who I am, right? Like, when you ask why, your brain immediately jumps to the threat response, and it architects this narrative that's not necessarily true when you're asking the question subjectively, right? But when you ask with non-judgment, it's easier to get down to what's actually happening there without judging yourself.
Yeah. Here's another example. This one will probably relate to a lot of people. Just, any habits or routines. So let's say talk about, doom scrolling. You're up late doom scrolling at midnight. You have to get up early. You know that as you stay up late, it's going to hurt your performance the next day. You're aware of all of this. The noticing is there. You know exactly what's happening, but understanding is when you can get to understanding what the need is that it's serving. And then that can give you an actual alternative. And I think most people never even ask those questions. They never get there. They're just like, I have this horrible habit and I keep doing it, and I know it's bad for me, but I just can't stop. And so they've noticed, the awareness is there, but they've yet to understand. The understanding has not come online as to what's really happening underneath. What am I avoiding, procrastinating? What need am I feeling? Maybe your day was dopamine deprived, your work day, and that's what you're doing, or maybe you're really avoiding something coming the next day. There's a lot of what it could be, but very few people get to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example that a lot of people can relate to. For instance, maybe it's like you said, the dopamine, you haven't had dopamine during the day, or maybe it's an autonomy thing. Like, you've had such a structured day of people telling you what to do, or you're at work or something. So that's like your brain trying to find autonomy, right? And it's like, I'm controlling this scenario, even though I'm doom scrolling for 2 hours and it's not productive at all. But like, once you understand that's what's trying to happen, then you can change those habits. Because if autonomy seeking is the goal, then there's a healthier way to do that. So here's the thing about this gap between awareness and change. It's not a mystery. It has a structure, And once you see the structure, you can actually work with it.
Yeah. And I know you're going to walk us through a framework, Luke, but before we do that, I just want to tell a brief story that kind of helps bring it home. Oprah Winfrey, very inspiring person. Oprah has talked about how for years she found herself saying yes when she wanted to say no. She just overcommitted herself. She wasn't unaware of it. In fact, she often knew at the very moment that she was agreeing to something she didn't want to do. So the breakthrough wasn't for her, it wasn't awareness. The breakthrough was when she started to understand that the behavior was connected to a deep need for approval and acceptance. Once she understood what the behavior was protecting, then setting boundaries stopped feeling selfish and started feeling healthy. And, I don't think she would have reached or attained the success that she has had she not figured that out. So it went beyond awareness and into understanding and action.
That's a great example. Yeah, that bridges to the framework very well. So here's a 3-step framework, some practical application you can take from the episode. First step is notice. Name what's happening without judgment and without trying to fix it yet. And what it looks like in practice is maybe I'm avoiding this conversation. I'm anxious right now. You literally just name it objectively without judgment. So that's notice. The next step is understand. Ask a better question, not what's wrong with me, but what is this protecting me from? And that might look like, this avoidance shows up when I feel like the outcome isn't safe or I can't control the outcome. Well, what would make it feel safer?
I think a good question here on understand kind of came from Dr. Judd Brewer when we had him on. What was his question? Whether it was, he wrote a book on anxiety, New York Times best-selling book, and then he also wrote one on the food habit. And I think for both of those, the question was, what am I getting from this?
Yes.
And that's what took awareness to the understand level is, what am I getting from this? And just that one question has helped me. I mean, I've just been sort of since that episode, and because I read his book, The Food Habit, in preparation for our interview with him. And just that question, I've noticed just in the last month, has significantly helped me with improving my food eating. When I'm tempted to grab a cookie or whatever it is, a bad, however you define it, an unhealthy option, is I ask myself, what am I getting from this? And that helped move awareness to understanding myself in just little ways. But it's like, oh, I'm looking for a distraction. I'm on a work break and I'm looking for a distraction. Well, there's more healthier things than eating something or whatever it is. And I don't need to go into all the details of like the answers to those questions, but what am I getting from this was sort of the Judd Brewer question that for me personally has really taken hold.
Yes. No, and this, to take from Dr. Brewer again, I think a key about understanding and the way he frames it is just curiosity in itself is really powerful here. Get really curious about the what, like you're saying, Dave. Like, what am I getting from this? Like when you have that curious mindset, it's really helpful to help your brain recognize, understand, and file it away, right? So when it comes up again. So be curious in understanding. And then the last step is evolve. So notice, understand, and evolve. So notice, again, GPS blue dot. Understand is forming the route, and evolve is driving. It's the action. So one small committed action, not a personality overhaul, just one next step. So for procrastination, for instance, once you understand what's actually happening and you understand it, the action might be, I'll send the first sentence of the email, or I'll say one true thing in the conversation instead of suppressing and shutting down. So just small action.
Yeah, in our app, in the new app, we call these micro practices. So after a conversation, then an insight is delivered, and that insight and the reframe in that insight the goal is to sort of improve your awareness and help you to understand. And then there's a recommended micro practice, just one thing you can do. And I like that you said one small thing, because we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're not trying to solve whatever the issue is we're dealing with all at once. It's taking one small action. It's a loop. And as you do, take one step forward and then continue to like notice what's happening and understand how things are changing, and then taking another step forward, then it reinforces and ultimately can make meaningful changes in our lives. So that's why we named the app what we named it. Notice, Understand, Evolve. That's the acronym NUE, or new. That isn't a tagline. It's a response to exactly what the research is pointing out. The gap isn't between people who are aware and people who aren't. It's between people who stop at notice and people who have a bridge to the next two steps. New is that bridge.
And if you take nothing else from today, that the next time you catch yourself in a loop saying, I know what I'm doing and I can't stop, I keep repeating this pattern, don't try to understand it harder. Just ask one different question here. What is this protecting me from? Or like you said, Dave, what is this doing for me? That's the door to understanding, and everything else follows from there.
Well, this is great. The framework's great. I hope that everyone who's listening can apply it. But let's talk about some common pitfalls that you might run into, or some common mistakes. So one is confusing analysis with action, right? So more awareness feels productive. It feels like progress, so people stay in it. And, I think that's pretty much been the primary message of this episode, is that awareness alone is not only insufficient, but over-awareness or ruminating on awareness can in some cases make it worse. So instead, I think you got to set a time limit on reflection. Notice, but then move on to, what does this tell me before that loop starts? Getting back to like, what is this doing for me? What job is this accomplishing? Why am I feeling this way? And being really curious about moving it to the next phase of understanding.
Yeah, I like that. Another common pitfall is just using awareness as evidence of being broken, or like forming your identity in a negative way, where, you might say something like, I know I do this, I still do it, I'm doing this over and over again, so something must be really wrong with me. And like you said earlier, Dave, it's not a character flaw. This is not a personality trait. Nothing is wrong with you. Awareness is data, not a verdict. It tells you where you are, not who you are.
Yeah. Another pitfall is skipping the understand step. Just going straight from noticing to taking action. This one's probably pretty common, where we're just like, oh yeah, I've noticed I've got this like bad habit of eating snacks late at night. Great. I'm starting this new diet. And this is honestly, and the food is a good analogy here, because this is why 99% of diets fail, is because we go from notice to action. We notice the problem. We've identified a habit we want to change, a behavior, particularly around food. And then we're just like, okay, I'm going to address it. Here's the new rules I'm putting in place. Here's the new diet. And we've skipped over probably the most important. I wouldn't, by itself, understand isn't the most important, because unless we actually take action, then none of it matters. But understanding is such a key part of being able to make change, and a key part of mental fitness. It's noticing, understanding, evolve. But if we don't understand what's actually happening inside of us, why are we eating? And again, just drawing back on our discussion with Dr. Brewer, but the whole point of his book, when he was doing the food research, a big epiphany for him that completely changed, this was earlier in his career, and completely changed the way he approached anxiety and everything else in his practice, was the recognition that people with food disorders, eating disorders, couldn't tell the difference between when they were hungry and not hungry. And so basically, they didn't understand why they were eating. And most of us don't. We're not eating actually because we're hungry. We're eating when we feel anxious. We're eating when we feel depressed. We're eating for all these other reasons. And if we never take the time to understand it, we can notice. We can log everything we eat. We can record it in a calorie counter, and we can know exactly what our food patterns are. And then if we jump right to action, we're probably going to fail because we haven't really addressed the core issue. And so that's when he says, what is this doing for me? And being really curious. Why do I like eating this thing? And in his example, the gummy worms, and he had a gummy worm addiction sort of in grad school. And then the more he like dove into that, he realized he didn't even actually like gummy worms. It was doing a job for him, but what he thought it was doing, it wasn't actually doing, and it had all these other negative side effects. There's bad for your health, bad for your teeth, all this other stuff. So I think that a big pitfall is skipping the understand. We need to spend enough time understanding underlying motives and understanding really what's happening inside us internally so that when we take action, it's guided appropriately.
And I think it's such a good point. And this is arguably the biggest pitfall, Dave, because a lot of people could be aware of a problem. And then I think the food one's a really good one. It's like, maybe you're trying to lose some weight. You need to stop night snacking or something. But when you go straight from noticing to evolve, straight to the action with understanding is the bridge from notice to evolve, right? And we go straight to evolve, you're literally relying on willpower alone most of the time. You're just trying to white knuckle through and like grit and discipline. Like, I can't do this. But when you understand it over time, it rewires your brain to where you don't even want the gummy worms at all. He even said they like disgust him. He's like, now when I look at gummy worms, like they look disgusting. So he completely rewired the way his brain sees that.
Yeah, and not that anyone cares about my food habits, but that it's really been interesting. I think that discussion with him, for me personally, has driven so much increased understanding of myself in the last 4 or 5 weeks. And it's honestly in a short period of time dramatically improved my eating habits. Because when I stop and ask, what is this doing for me? I realize a lot of times I'm not hungry. I'm procrastinating something, or I'm trying to feel better about something. I'm trying to relieve stress. And if I recognize it's relieving stress, there's a way better way to relieve stress. I have a trampoline in my backyard for the kids. Man, a 5-minute jump on the trampoline does way more to relieve stress than anything I can eat. And if it's something I'm avoiding, well, understanding that that's what I'm doing, okay, then I can start tackling that problem and say, okay, what's a micro step I can take on that task that I'm procrastinating? Or if it's trying to feel better, whatever it is. It's just, I don't want to get into all the details. It's just, I've just had this huge increased understanding of myself just by asking that question, what is this doing for me? And recognizing that most of the time when I'm eating, it's not because I'm hungry.
I love that. And I think you kind of touched on a key point here. The understanding doesn't have to be some huge wake up or like some big deep meaning in your life. Like think of the example back where you're lashing out or you're really irritable with like a partner or something. When you move to understanding, that could be as simple as something in your biology, like, hey, my blood sugar's low. I haven't realized I haven't eaten for like 6 hours. So this is why I'm irritable, lashing out in this moment, right? So it doesn't always have to be some deep meaning when you work through the understanding. It could be something more simple than that.
Everything we talk about on this show, the science, the frameworks, the habits, New is where you actually put it into practice. New is the mental fitness app built to help you reflect, notice patterns, and build real mental strength and capacity over time. It remembers what you're working on and meets you where you are. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just a daily practice for your mental fitness. If you're watching, scan the QR code on the screen. If you're listening, head to talkwithnu.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Another interesting example, and I bring him up regularly, but an interesting example that sort of epitomizes a lot of what we've talked about is Michael Phelps. Now, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard versions of this already, but if this is your first time and you may not be aware, the greatest Olympian and greatest swimmer of all time, Michael Phelps, had this common pattern. After every Olympic, he hit this cycle where he went into depression. There was like the high, there was like the build up, and then there was the performance of the Olympics, and he obtained results that no one had ever obtained before. And then post Olympics, there was this deep depression, and he felt lost, and he withdrew, and he kept it secret, and he was ashamed, and all this stuff. The first time it happened, he was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. But then it happened again and again. The awareness was there. So he had noticed what was happening. The problem was that the awareness wasn't changing anything. So what finally shifted for Michael Phelps was when he started to understand. And what he came to understand was that the depression wasn't about swimming. It was about his identity. His entire sense of worth had become attached to his performance. And once you've reached that level of height, no regular swim meet, even world championships can compare to the level of the Olympics, which happens only every 4 years. And so when the Olympics is over, it was very hard for him to feel purpose in his life, knowing that the next Olympics was 4 years away. And so his identity was attached to his performance in the pool. And once he understood what the behavior was protecting him from, which was the fear of being a nobody without his medals, then with that understanding, the path forward became visible. And that included for him therapy and other things. And he's talked very openly about this a lot. But what happened in his life would have never happened had the understanding never come. And it wasn't, he was aware of the cycle after it happened the first time, and it started happening the second time. He's like, I know it's exactly what's happening here. He just didn't have an understanding of what it meant.
That's a really powerful example. And this, going back to the swimming analogy, and it fits with Michael Phelps. I didn't think about that because he's a swimmer. But the treading water versus swimming to the shore, it can be exhausting. I mean, being in a depressive state, that's exhausting. There's so much cognitive and emotional load. It's also probably a lot of work after he understood this. As you said, he went through therapy, he went through things, and he had to process all of this stuff, right? And it's uncomfortable to notice what the truth is there, whether it's an ego, whether it's an ego thing or something. But if you're going to be exhausted and work, wouldn't you rather swim to the shore, the destination of where you're going, instead of just tread water, right? So just saying that it might be uncomfortable, the understand process, that bridge to evolve, from notice, understand, evolve, but it's totally worth it to get to shore versus treading water.
Yeah. If we go back to kind of our framework and we just think of listeners, I think that we've talked about a couple of different areas, but I think if we think of doom scrolling or any sort of undesired digital habits, or food, eating, or exercise, in those three, there's probably not anyone listening or any of us that aren't impacted by at least one of those, if not two or three of them.
Yes.
And so maybe just thinking about picking sort of the area of struggle, and it could be one of those three or even something else, and starting with notice, like you mentioned, what's happening, and, sort of being aware and sort of, and maybe even documenting. I think with spending habits and with food habits, the programs that have helped people the most, they start with a tracker, right? A lot of people that have bad spending habits is they start tracking where all their money's going. So that's the notice. That's raising awareness of what's happening. And maybe a calorie tracker does a lot to raise awareness. But not stopping there, because that's the first step. Then really understanding. And this is one thing where you can use the app for, is talking to the app, and it can help you sort of uncover and increase the understanding, uncover what's really happening underneath why you're spending the money, or why you're overeating, or why you're doom scrolling when you should be doing something else, or whatever the undesired behavior is. And then evolving. And again, the app does a really good job of identifying micro practices of just small things you can do every day. But I think for listeners, it would be if the content here resonates with you, but you don't walk away doing anything different, then it's sort of wasted. So I would challenge everyone to sort of think of the one area of something that you can improve on, and apply this framework. And if it's helpful, download the app, and that will help walk you through it as well.
All right. Here's what we covered today. 1, self-awareness is the starting line, not the finish line. 95% of people think they're self-aware. The ones who are still stuck are usually the ones who stopped there at noticing. 2, without a bridge to understanding, awareness loops into rumination and anxiety. The research is clear from Urich, Cross, Pennebaker. They all point to the same thing. Awareness alone is not the mechanism of change. 3, the framework is notice, understand, evolve. Noticing is step 1. Understanding what the thing means and what it's protecting you from is the bridge. Evolving is one committed action, micro practice, small and real. But if there's one thing to take with you from today, it's this. You don't need more awareness. You need a better bridge.
And here's what we want to leave you with. Think about the thing that you keep doing and you can't stop. We just spent several minutes talking about that. Don't try to outthink it tonight. Just ask one question. What is this protecting me from? And sit with that and see what comes up. Just spend tonight asking that question. And
you can follow this framework by yourself, writing things down, just thinking through things. But if you want a tool built specifically for that bridge, for moving from noticing to understanding to actually doing something different with some guidance, that's what new is. Notice, understand, evolve. Try it at talkwithnew, N-U-E, talkwithnew.com, and we'll see you next week.
One last thing. If this was useful, please leave us a rating or a review. We read every single one, and more importantly, it helps the algorithm surface the show to people who are actively looking for this kind of content. Mental fitness doesn't get talked about enough. Help us change that.